Alrighty then. I do believe we are recording. Hello and welcome to question and answer number 168. I am your host, pannobhasa, and of course 168 is nowhere near to being prime. It is in fact, if I did my math correctly, 2 times 2 times 2 times 3 times 7. And a few other slight aberrations you may notice. First of all is, again, I'm doing this Q&A on a Sunday morning, so it's going to be posted later than usual. Part of the reason for that is that my mate, my lovely woman, has expressed a certain amount of dissatisfaction for me starting Q&As too late on Saturday. So sometimes we run around, go to like grocery stores, fish stores, whatever, and then we come home, and by the time I get the Q&A started and finished, it's like late, and then we can't really celebrate Saturday night properly as any loving couple should do. Also, you may notice I finally have succeeded in accomplishing the mission. I have a Mjolnir bead hanging from my beard braid, and it's imported from Ukraine, which I guess is appropriate considering that Ukraine is the home of Kievan Rus. Like, the first Russians actually were in Ukraine, or at least one of the two main cities of the first Russian kingdom, or whatever you want to call it, was in Kiev, and it was ruled by Vikings. So we've got the Mjolnir bead, which I'm pretty sure is right side up, because I think that rune is Thorn, which was the TH sound in like the old English alphabet, very old English. And who knows, maybe it's just random, or maybe the TH is for Thor or Thunor. Anyways, I guess I should start answering questions. And the first question is from Stellar Supreme et al. Because he's got so many names, he is Legion. And Stellar Supreme et al. Says, what are your thoughts on the seeming conflict between the Buddha saying it was profoundly difficult to acquire a human birth and past life research with children where they verify what human it was in recent history? Yeah, if you do like past life regressions or like children remembering past lives, it's almost always a human life. Every once in a while you have a past life regression, like in Burma, where they'll have a past life to like being a dragon or a royal white elephant, that sort of thing. I've encountered both of those cases. But for the most part, if you remember past lives, you remember human past lives. But it is true that in the suttas, the Buddha says it's extremely difficult to get a human life. And mainly what he's referring to is if you're not human, to switch over to being human is very difficult. Like animals, there's the famous sutta of the blind sea turtle that comes up once every 100 years. And the odds of an animal being reborn as a human, statistically speaking, even though statistics hadn't been invented yet in the Iron Age Ganges Valley, would be... the odds of a non-human, like an animal, being reborn as a human would be about the same as that blind turtle sticking its head up through a yolk floating on the ocean, just at random. Once every 100 years, it sticks its head up for air. They can hold their breath a long time, apparently. And so... The implication here mainly is that there are just an infinite number of beings throughout the universe, just non-human. Most beings in this universe, even on this planet, are non-human. You just think about all the copepods swimming out in the ocean. There's probably hundreds of billions of them out there. And karma really is a kind of psychic momentum or psychological momentum. So if you're not like in the human groove, to switch over to being human take some doing. I mean, like, your best chances might be if you're like a domesticated animal, like a pet dog that's getting a lot of human vibes that kind of help you to kind of turn in that direction. Then who knows, maybe this dog's next life would be like a human child that nevertheless doesn't survive past the first year. Something like that. And then that's kind of like a foot in the door that might help channel its karmic momentum into a more human life. So, yeah, once you're human, then you kind of have human karmic momentum going. And whether that's really in harmony with the suttas or not, nevertheless, it does seem to be in harmony with just common sense and maybe some paranormal empiricism, if you don't consider those to be contradictions in terms. So if you're not human, to get into like a human life is extremely difficult as a general rule, according to Buddhist philosophy. But once you're already a human, it's much easier to be reborn as a human because you're making human karma. And so it just naturally leads to being a human unless you're like a really unusual human. Like if you're an unusually like saintly, godly kind of human, you might get reborn as a small g god or goddess. If you're like an abnormally bestial kind of human, you might get reborn as an animal. Or if you're like extremely attached to some worldly thing, for example, you could get reborn as a kind of spirit or ghost that's like attached to a certain area. For example, there are quite a few people in Burma that claim to be able to see ghosts. Plenty of people in Asia, really, who claim that they're able to see ghosts. And one of these people was saying that like certain cemeteries, they look out at the cemeteries and there's just like these spirits just kind of standing around graves because the person in life was so attached to their body that even after death, they're still attached to their body. Even though their body is no longer functioning and is decomposing under the ground, they still just kind of like haunt that area, just sort of standing watch over their body because they're so attached to it. Even though technically it's not really their body anymore. Which is one reason why Neem Karoli Baba, whose picture is up there on the altar, would say that cremation is generally better than burial after a person dies, just because you're like destroying the body that the person might be attached to, which reduces the odds of them being like a spirit that is just like haunting a cemetery. Of course, if you're just a scientific materialist, then it's all bullshit and you don't have to worry about that. So let's see, did I answer the question? My thoughts on the seeming conflict between the Buddha saying it was profoundly difficult to acquire a human birth and past life research with children. Yeah, it's pretty much as I said. It's acquiring a human birth from being a non-human is much more difficult than just being reborn as a human when you're already human, just because the karmic momentum is like a human momentum at that point. So I'm just going to move on to Stellar Supreme et al.'s next question here. What are your thoughts on anarchy as it's presented here? And he presents a quote. He doesn't say who the quote is from. But here's the quote. I repeat, anarchy for me means autocracy of beauty, of genius, of art, and of all those who possess the willful and selective qualities suitable for dominating, and that Mother Nature, justly or unjustly, grants and lavishes so generously on a few, while she denies them to most, as if the latter were her bastard children. Everyone can be leveled before society. We are all equal before God, but the selective individual values remain. They remain and dominate. Unquote. So this kind of sounds like Ayn Rand to me. I don't know who the quote is from. But anarchy, like autocracy of beauty, of genius, of art, and of all those who possess the willful and selective qualities suitable for dominating. Well, let's see. What is that exactly the question here? What are my thoughts on anarchy as it's presented here? Well, I mean, when you're dominating, it's not really anarchy because you become a kind of autocrat when you're dominating somebody else. You know, they don't have anarchy anymore because you are their ruler at that point. Like if you're just imposing your will on somebody else, then I mean that could be like a one-man kingdom. You know, it's like I don't think it would work in reality. Like when you have this kind of anarchy, then it's like the most ruthless shark, and it was also like the most in cleverness, you know, the best strategic choices and so forth, is going to wind up becoming like a ruler, a warlord or a king or a chief or something like that. And then the anarchy, of course, disappears. I really don't think anarchy works in general unless you can have a kind of anarchy like a Burmese village where there's not much government going on, but it's just people are ruled by tradition. You know, it's this 1,000-year-old tradition that people just follow without question. And then you could have a kind of anarchy like that. But just to have like no holds barred, you know, just the people that are the most powerful just do whatever they want, including dominating others, then the anarchy just disappears. I mean, with regard to beauty and genius and art and so forth, that's fine. But I mean, you don't need anarchy for that. Just some sort of classical liberalism is plenty. I mean, you still have to have some sort of like law and order, some sort of government, presumably, to kind of maintain law and order, among other things. So yeah, I'm really not an anarchist. It might sound good in theory, just like libertarianism, which is, you know, maybe a step away from anarchy. Still, I mean, it sounds good in theory, but still you have to have, in order for a nation to be strong and functional, you have to have like a shared value system. People have to share values. At least the overwhelming majority of the population has to share approximately the same values and, you know, be willing to follow certain rules. And mainly, I mean, as a general rule, you need some kind of government to make sure that people are following those rules. So, I mean, people can argue, well, government systems are corrupt and all this, but I mean, any human system is going to be corrupt because humans are subject to corruption. So, yeah, I do believe that there should be a certain equality with regard to equality under the law, equality of opportunities, of rights, that kind of thing, within reason. I mean, if somebody is like a convicted felon or some such, sure, you can take away their right to bear arms, etc. They're a convicted sex offender, you know, they should be deprived of their right to be like working at a daycare center, that sort of thing. But yeah, I definitely, I mean, I suppose I qualify as a classical liberal politically and socially. I do believe in quite a lot of freedom, but still there has to be a shared value system that is sort of like the glue that holds society together. And that value system, I mean, the following of certain rules is necessary, and there has to be some government, some kind of government enforcing that. I mean, preferably a benevolent government where, you know, the leaders are like patriots who really want to serve their country and so forth. And that does happen occasionally. But still, I mean, you're not going to have a perfect system because the system is created by humans who are not perfect. Not unless everything is perfect. I mean, you could argue everything is already perfect, you know, perfect misery, perfect foolishness, etc. And some saints would probably view the world that way. You know, I got this pain in my leg, but it's perfect. So I guess I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Romeo. And I'm checking to make sure that we're recording early on, less than 15 minutes into it. Yep, the little timer thing is going. The little green bars on the microphone are going back and forth, just as it should be. Next question is from Romeo. And Romeo's question is as follows. What is your knowledge and opinion of the Theosophical movement founded by Madame Blavatsky in the late 1800s? From what I understand, Theosophy attempted to combine aspects of different religions, including Buddhism, into one system. Well, I really don't know a whole lot about theosophy. I've never really studied it. I never really took it extremely seriously. I read a little bit about the history, Madame Blavatsky and Colonel Olcott and that sort of thing. And my sweetheart does watch YouTube videos of like speeches given by, invited speakers at some theosophical society. So, I mean, I listen to that sort of thing occasionally, pick it up through osmosis. But really, my knowledge of the theosophical movement, it was founded by Madame Blavatsky and her cohort, Colonel Olcott. And Colonel Olcott, he was definitely a promoter of Buddhism. He's the one who invented the Buddhist flag. And it's also my understanding that, what's his name? Rice Davids, who was pretty much the founder of the Polytech Society, started off, I think he and his wife started off as like Christian missionaries in Ceylon, and then they kind of became theosophists, and then they were sort of Buddhist adjacent theosophists. Maybe just they became Buddhists and stopped being theosophists. I'm not sure exactly. But theosophy, from what little I know about it, supposedly Madame Blavatsky was channeling ascended masters in the Himalayas who I'm pretty sure were some kind of Buddhists. And then she got busted. Like they were doing essentially seances where she's channeling these ascended masters in the Himalayas, and these notes from the ascended masters were just like falling from the ceiling, just landing on the table in front of them. And then it turned out that apparently Madame Blavatsky herself was pulling a little thread, which was pulling these notes from a crack in the ceiling, where they arrived with this little poof of like attic dust or something. I think that was mainly the scandal that caused her to get kicked out of her own society. And then she got replaced by Annie Besant. I don't know how to pronounce these names. I'm pretty solid on that one, but the last name. And it was kind of a new agey kind of thing as far as I can understand. It's sort of like perennial philosophy, where, they're just trying to sort of get the, lowest common denominator. They're just trying to sort of be an eclectic movement, but it was largely Buddhism oriented, or at least like Eastern philosophy oriented, because they considered, in my opinion, correctly, that you have a more concentrated form of profundity in certain Eastern traditions that are more watered down in Western traditions. They're still there. Like in Christianity, you can still have some really deep profundity, but the whole belief system, the Abrahamic monotheistic belief system, is such that, it's kind of a handicap to like the really profound teachings that are available to humans. Let's see, what else do I know about theosophy? It was like the Mahabodhi Society was largely theosophist, like Anagarika Dharmapala. He was supported by the Theosophist Society, and he was getting, he was starting the push to have Bodh Gaya sort of revived as a Buddhist pilgrimage site instead of just sort of like this rundown ruin kind of in the backyard of a Shaivite temple sort of a deal. And what else? There was one of the, Krishnamurti. He was groomed to be some kind of world messiah by a branch of the Theosophical Society. And then he just went renegade and decided not to cooperate. But theosophy, if you're into just kind of like an eclectic kind of philosophical approach to spirituality, then that's fine. Madame Blavatsky's alleged fraud, it shouldn't be too much of a problem, because as like George P. Hansen in the Trickster and the Paranormal points out, that even like legitimate like psychics and so forth, they can still do a lot of fraud stuff. It's in a way like the fake stuff is like opening a portal. It's sort of breaking rules, which then allows genuine juju to enter this version of reality, so to speak. But I'm no authority on theosophy. It is, I mean, you might as well just stick with Buddhism. It's an older tradition. It's been tried and tested for thousands of years at this point. And I mean, if you're just sort of like a Western eclectic, theosophy may work for you. It may just be just what you need. But as a general rule, you'd probably be better off with like established Buddhist tradition or any other established like advanced mystical tradition that is, at least 2,000 years old. And I'm just going to move on to Romeo's next question. He says, aside from theosophy, what is your general opinion of similar interfaith spiritual hybrid movements that combine aspects of different religions or philosophical systems, religious or philosophical systems? I've even heard that there is a Chrislam movement afoot that combines Christianity and Islam. Well, one of the first things that this reminds me of is the belief of Rene Guénon that anything like this is just abomination and it's doomed to failure. Guénon, however you pronounce French names, I don't know. He insisted you have to have like an unbroken like lineage, and any kind of amalgamation of various traditions is just, you're creating like a Frankenstein's monster of religion at best. But I mean, it can work. I mean, they have worked before, like interfaith spiritual hybrid movements, sort of like Chinese Buddhism, like Chan Buddhism, was really a kind of hybrid combination of Buddhism and Taoism. Like Zen Buddhism really is a kind of combination of Buddhism and Taoism, or like Christianity, obviously. It's like a combination of like Judaism. I mean, Christianity really is a kind of schismatic sect of Judaism, combined with sort of like Greek philosophy and just more Western pagan philosophical ideas. Buddhism itself has been influenced by Vedic Brahmanism. But so in a way, there's bound to be a certain amount of spiritual hybridism going on. Like the Buddha notoriously was accepting ideas and terminology, especially from the Brahmins. And also, like Ajahn Thanisaro claims, the word asawa, which is a fundamental Buddhist philosophical term of, sometimes it's translated as like cankers. There's really no good translation for it. Literally means influence. Literally. The Buddhists got that from the Jains. It was originally a Jain idea. So, I mean, a certain amount of hybridism does happen. Like Islam itself is fairly hybridized. I mean, it's like a hybrid mainly of Judaism and like pre-Muslim Arabic paganism, as well as I understand it. Like, what were they called? The Sabbateans? Whatever the religious system was of Petra, like I believe that's in Jordan, the famous stone city carved into the cliff that, that was sort of like an Arabic pagan kind of religion at the time, that Judaism was probably influenced by that and influenced by just local traditions and influenced by Judaism, maybe a little bit of Christianity. There is mention of Jesus in Judaism where Jesus was considered to be a legitimate prophet. So, I mean, it does happen, and it does happen successfully. But if you get too eclectic, like New Age people, some of them, they can just be like adding mutually contradictory ideas into their own belief system, and that's not good. I mean, you don't want to be believing one thing and then 5 minutes later you're believing essentially the opposite, something that's just contradictory to what you were believing 5 minutes ago, and have it like in your beliefs all fit together somehow. That's not good. That's kind of soft-headed, actually. So I'm not sure what Chrislam would be like. Although, I mean, Jesus is acknowledged as a legitimate prophet. I mean, if you just a follower of Jesus while at the same time just considering him to be not the son of God, but just like a prophet, a legitimate, genuine prophet of God, then maybe, some of the early sects of Christianity before they were annihilated or just outcompeted in like the early to mid to late Roman Empire, they were kind of like that. The Arian heresy where Jesus was not God, that kind of thing. So, I mean, under certain circumstances, a kind of spiritual hybrid movement can work, so long as you're not so eclectic that you're just bringing in all kinds of mutually contradictory ideas into the same system. But Rene Guénon would say otherwise. I mean, it has to be like an unbroken, what's the term that he was using, where there has an initiatory tradition that is unbroken. But I think he was a little naive with regard to just how some of these traditions began. Even if they began 2,000 years ago, still there's a lot of eclectic kind of combinations that happen at the beginning of a religious movement, like Buddhism with Vedism and Jainism and so forth, or Islam with Judaism and like Arabian paganism and so forth, or Christianity with Judaism and Western like paganistic philosophy, that kind of thing. So it can work so long as it's just not too muddled and too like self-contradictory. But if you have a system that already works, you might as well just do that instead of experimenting with trying to create some new system, unless that's just the way you operate. That's the way you have to operate. So just do your best in that case. And I'm moving on to the next question. This is from Fake Tig. And Fake Tig says, you spoke a lot about Schopenhauer's will before, but only in reference to other things. Can you explain what it is, though? So the philosophy of Schopenhauer, like in his main classic philosophical text, The World as Will and Representation, that he starts off with will. It's sort of like a modern physicist starts off with energy. It's almost an undefined term in science. I mean, you have to get down to like such basics that you start off with what are essentially just axiomatic or like undefined terms. In modern science, it's energy. And I mean, you can still kind of define it, the potential to perform work, something like that. But in Schopenhauer's philosophy, it was will. I mean, that is just like the motive force of the universe. It's sort of his substitute for God Almighty, capital G God. It's just this will to exist. It's just this energetic, essentially mental force that wants to exist. It's in a way, it's sort of like in Buddhism, the conceit I am. That's what kind of artificially separates one aspect of mentality from all the rest of it. Although Schopenhauer goes so far as to say that even physical matter, even a hydrogen atom, an electron, has this will to exist. And so, according to Schopenhauer, there's just like this fundamental primordial like mental energy just wanting to express itself in the form of any kind of existence it can manage. And that's what's creating this entire phenomenal universe, creating us. And Schopenhauer's philosophy, his practical, like his yogic, spiritual kind of philosophy, is that we should be defying our own will in order to just get out of this, because he agrees with Buddhism that this will is creating suffering, that you don't have any suffering without this will just striving to manifest itself in every possible way. So Schopenhauer was just kind of deny the will, peaceful non-cooperation with the will, which is forcing you to exist. And it's fairly Buddhist. I mean, I've read recently that Schopenhauer was declaring himself to be a Buddhist in his later years. So, in a way, it's sort of like Maya in like Hinduism, or just like avidya or ignorance in Buddhism. You know, it's like the original force or the original phenomenon that is just resulting in the multiplicity of this samsaric universe. And I guess I'm just going to move on to Fake Tig's next question, which is as follows. If enlightenment is defined as the uprooting of greed, hatred, and delusion, doesn't that make someone almost not human in the sense that a person that can't hate or be greedy or know ultimate reality had almost transcended humanity? And if so, is Buddhism about becoming higher than a human being? Yeah, well, definitely from the Buddhist point of view, Buddhism is about becoming higher than a human being. And like I've said, in Burma, the word for a Buddhist monk, I mean, monks are not considered to be human beings. You know, the word for human being is lu in Burmese. And, or like if you're counting, the Burmese language has this weird phenomenon of counting numbers. Like 4 people wouldn't be like lei lu. It'd be like lu lei yao. Yao is the counting word for counting people, or gaon is for counting animals. So kwe is dog, and lei is 4, but you don't say lei kwe, 4 dogs. You say kwe lei gaon, which is dog, 4 animals. And so the counting number for monks isn't yao as it is for everyone else. It's ba, which is for counting holy or sacred things or entities. Like pisi le ba, no. Let's see. How about disa le ba, which is like the 4 noble truths. Arya disa le ba. So you count the 4 noble truths with ba because they're like noble and sacred and so forth. You use the same word for counting monks. So let's see here. Yeah, I mean, if you read what a monk is supposed to be like in order to become enlightened, you know, no preferences, no greed, no anger, no lust, no self-view. I mean, you are transcending your own humanity. I mean, empirically, a fully enlightened being would still be a human, still be wearing a human body. You know, the DNA would be human DNA. They would still have certain, like, human habits. You know, they might show human emotions and so forth. But the thing is, they're not identified with that anymore. You know, it's just sort of nature taking its course. Well, they are just not identified with that. They do not consider that to be me or I or mine. And so you've not necessarily become totally inhuman, but you have transcended the limitations of your humanity. So let's see here. I see my sweetie's coming into the driveway, which distracts me because her presence just kind of, I've got like sweetie dar, you know, it's like my radar is always kind of affected when she enters the field of perception. So let's see here. Yeah, I mean, that's one reason why if you're a monk, like just according to the texts, then you renounce society, you renounce family life, you renounce social interactions for the most part, because you're just sort of separating yourself from that, because that kind of holds you into being a human. Whereas if you just go alone out into the wilderness, you're just like meditating and sleeping under a tree out in a forest, then it's much easier to be like non-human in your behavior and in your like psychology. But really, you have to transcend being a mere human being if you're going to become enlightened, at least according to Buddhism. I mean, there's still humanity there. It's just that you're not identified with that anymore. So I'm just going to move on to Fake Tig's third question, which is, I looked up what goes to hell after someone. He says after someone does, but I think he means after someone dies. I looked up what goes to hell after someone dies, and since Buddhism didn't believe in an eternal Atman, I couldn't comprehend what it is that gets reborn into a hell realm. Well, it would be the same thing that gets reborn into a human realm or any other realm. It's just your karma. It's the only thing, according to Buddhism, the only thing that transmigrates is the momentum of your karma. Regardless of whether you're reborn as a human or as a small g god in some superhuman realm, or as a denizen of hell, or an animal, or whatever, a ghost, some kind of demonic entity, whatever, that it's the same thing as being reborn in any of those cases, which is just this, like, the karmic momentum, the psychic momentum of your karma, of your mental states, especially your volitions, which is like Schopenhauer's will. So Schopenhauer's will really most closely corresponds to karma in a human. It's just this blind force of wanting to exist, really. Although karma doesn't necessarily, it wouldn't be exactly the same as Schopenhauer's will, but like in the text, karma is volition, which could be translated as will. It's chetana. Chetanaham bhikkhave kamam vadami. So chetana usually is translated as volition, but you could translate it just as easily as will, possibly even more accurately as will. So it's will that gets reborn. That's it. That's the only thing you take with you after you die, is the momentum of your mental states, your like psychological habits, essentially, especially the deep ones, the subconscious ones. So I'm just going to move on to the next question, which is from Cherzaskaziz. And Cherzaskaziz says, according to Hinduism, we are living in Kali Yuga. Our people will get more stupid and retarded until human race disappears. Is concept of Kali Yuga in Theravada Buddhism? Well, it's not exactly the same concept, but I think it was just the previous Q&A I'm talking about, or I was talking about, how according to Buddhism, after you have a Buddha, then like the human race starts to degenerate, especially after Buddhism finally disappears from the world. Dhamma in the world kind of helps to maintain civilization. But then after it finally fades out, because everything is impermanent, including, any Buddhist dispensation, then civilization degenerates more and more. There's no more dharma in the world, so morality kind of fades out, and you just get more dog eat dog, until finally it gets down to the human lifespan is only like 10 years, and you reach puberty at like 5, and there's like people are just, there's no morals, you just cannibalism, all this kind of stuff going on. And then finally, after hitting rock bottom, it starts getting better again. And it's the same way in the Hindu Kali Yuga, the Hindu Dark Age, where, it's not just the end of the world. It's just that when you get to the end of the Kali Yuga, at least in this particular case, then Kalki on the white horse, the next avatar of Vishnu will come and slay the evil ones and just get everything kind of back on course so that things can improve again, help bring about a golden age again. But in Buddhism, it's a little different, where it's sort of like cosmic cycles of up and down of civilizations, for example. And supposedly we are on a downhill slide because, the Buddha has already been here, and Dhamma is in decline. It's due to impermanence. So Dhamma is in the process of gradually getting corrupted and dying out, until finally, after it's gone, then things really start going into free fall. Things get really bad till you hit rock bottom, and then they start building back up again until the situation is ripe again for another Buddha to come. So presumably from the Buddhist point of view, the golden age, or the closest we get to a golden age, is when there is a Buddha in this world. Although if you look at, there's like this weird sutta towards the end of the Digha Nikaya, I don't remember the name of it, where, the Buddha's talking about the origin of the world, and people start off godlike, we live thousands and thousands of years, we just feed on light, that kind of thing. And then we gradually start degenerating into like the upgraded apes that we are now. But a lot of that is just ancient Indian mythology that, every culture has its mythology. Why the bear has a stumpy tail, all this kind of stuff And it can be absorbed into a religious system, so that the religion just, people think that that's what the religion teaches, when actually that's what the religious system just kind of absorbed from the culture, because that's the culture that it arose in. And it's really not the point of the religion. It's just this cultural artifact that just got absorbed through osmosis into the system, because that's just the way it happened. So yeah, according to Hinduism, we've been living in the Kali Yuga since prehistoric times. That the Kali Yuga has been around for a very long time already. So, I mean, there was no Silver Age or Golden Age or anything like that in historical times, at least going with modern archaeology. So the Buddhists have a little bit of an advantage over the Hindus on that, in that, well, maybe. Depends on how you look at it. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is also from Cherzaskis, and he's just repeating somebody else's question on the Discord server. He's saying, do you think some people are born evil, or it's all effective environment and experiences with others? Well, how you're born depends on your karma from previous existences, going with Buddhist philosophy. So, I mean, an evil person, you've got a lot of bad, malevolent sort of karma coming into this world. You can be born pretty much bad. And for a while, we haven't been doing it lately, but my sweetie and I were watching a certain show before going to bed at night, going to sleep to murder. It was Evil Lives Here. It's a show that's still being produced, I think. Still new episodes coming out. Although they've kind of used up all the worst sociopaths for the show. And so now it's, getting into the later episodes, a lot of the time it's just people who are just mean and don't say please and thank you and that sort of thing. But a lot of these episodes, there's some of the most interesting ones to me, is you've got a family and one kid is just a born sociopath. It's the other kids seem relatively normal, but this one kid, from the very beginning, from the time he's a toddler, he's already like torturing animals and like getting pleasure from hurting his brothers and sisters, that kind of thing. And just watching that show, it does kind of cause me to tentatively conclude, not once and for all, but tentatively, that some people really are just born that way. And that would be in harmony with Buddhist philosophy, where you've got some serial killer who somehow avoids hell or, some sort of demonic realm or something, gets reborn as a human, and they still have this momentum going from previous lives of just cruelty and malice and just, getting pleasure from the suffering of others, that sort of thing. So, yeah, I do think that, ultimately it's all conditioned by karma. So, ultimately, any birth that you come into, it's conditioned by your karma in previous existences, especially the previous existence. But still, going with empiricism, I've read books on sociopathy and so forth long ago, where there is like a statistically significant correlation between being a sociopath as like a juvenile delinquent and an adult, and having either abusive or neglectful parents. And the mechanism is that children require attention, just like my dogs require attention. They're hungry for attention. And I can get into like philosophical explanations for that, but it's not really the point here. But a child who is just being ignored by his parents will act out, and even they would prefer to be like yelled at and punished than just ignored, because they need attention, even if it's like negative, hostile attention. Somehow it's like, I'll get to Mary Baker Eddy here. She says that like babies sometimes will die of what is used to be called sudden infant death syndrome, simply because their mind isn't strong enough to maintain their existence in this world yet. And so they need other like more mature beings paying attention to them in order to kind of reinforce their existence in this world. And children apparently are like this. You know, it's like their mind isn't strong enough to just maintain. I mean, some adults are like this, where just their single solitary mind, you know, their individuality just is not robust enough to keep them in this version of reality without other people kind of helping to lock them in and reinforcing their existence through their own perceptions. But I've kind of wandered away from sociopaths or people who are born evil. But I think, I mean, it's possible. I mean, everyone has the potential to turn around and start doing good. Angulimala in the Buddhist text, classic example. He was literally a serial killer who later was converted to Buddhism and became a fully enlightened being. But I think it's definitely the case that you can be born just with a lot of like evil or just sort of cruel or malicious, selfish, sociopathic momentum. And most people really, they don't have the insight or the wisdom to be able to observe their own character flaws, their own defilements objectively. You know, they just identify with it. This is me. I'm pissed off. I hate that person, etc., etc. So I hope I answered that one, because I'm moving on to the next question. And this is a person with a German name that I cannot pronounce. Rechte Aussicht. I don't know. I do speak English, though, which is technically a Germanic language. A lot of people don't realize that. A lot of English-speaking people do not realize that English technically is a Germanic language. Old English was definitely Germanic. It's just that we absorbed a lot of French and Latin and so forth. Anyways, Rechte Ansicht says, in your Rechte, I guess it'd be Rechte. In your opinion, how much does Christianity have to do with mass migration and Islamization? Merkel is a Protestant, and so is Japan's former Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba. Furthermore, the new Pope Leo has already criticized the mistreatment, in quotes, mistreatment of so-called migrants in the USA. So the main question here, how much does Christianity have to do with mass migration and Islamization? I really don't think it has much to do with that. I mean, the Christianity in the West is in severe decline. You know, we have sort of a degenerate form of Christianity that has become mainstream, which is pretty much what is necessary for any kind of advanced spiritual system like Christianity or Buddhism. In order for it to go mainstream, it's got to be dumbed down and watered down and corrupted. And so Christianity has been corrupted almost from the beginning, but it's even more corrupt now. I mean, you've got gay pride flags flying over like what was Methodist churches, when the Bible itself calls homosexuality abomination. And like most Protestants are quite okay with divorce and remarriage, where Jesus himself in the New Testament says you just can't do that. When you get married once. So it's more a matter of just sort of corrupt liberal Western feminized civilization that is into mass migration. And it's just largely a coincidence that it's Christianity. If we had maintained paganism from Roman times, then it wouldn't be so different, I'm pretty sure. I mean, Rome had its own immigration problems. Like, for example, the fall of the Roman Empire, according to Gibbon, was largely the result of this mediocre emperor named Valens, who allowed this mass immigration of Goths across the Danube River. The Goths feared the Huns more than they feared the Romans, so they begged the Romans, the Roman emperor, the Roman government, just let us settle peacefully in like vacant lands of the Roman Empire. And Valens stupidly allowed them to do this, and they just started running amok. I mean, it wasn't entirely their fault. They were being like treated badly by certain Romans. Like, for example, some of the leaders of the Goths had to have their children held hostage, in certain like senatorial class families, for example, and then they were like being raped and sexually abused and so forth. And so, of course, that helped the Goths to start running amok. But still, I mean, it wouldn't have happened if the Roman government had not allowed hundreds of thousands of Goths to just flood across the borders. Oh, so yeah, I don't think it's really so much a Christian thing. I think it's just sort of a decadent Western civilization thing, especially after compassionate females have acquired equal rights. And like in Europe, I mean, they're more influential politically than the men are, apparently. And Angela Merkel is here is an example, although she's kind of fled the scene in disgrace after inviting literally millions of non-Europeans to enter Europe. So let's see here. How much does Christianity have to do with mass migration, Islamization? Yeah, I really don't see it as a Christian thing. I mean, it's not Christianity that's inviting migrants. I mean, it can be used as a kind of excuse. Some Christians will say, just the Old Testament says, you should always welcome foreigners. You should treat foreigners well because the Jews were foreigners in the land of Egypt, that kind of thing. But I mean, you read other books of the Old Testament, like the book of, what is it? Man, I haven't read the Old Testament in a while. It's an obscure book, and it's mainly about just after the Babylonian captivity ends, that the Persian king allowed Hebrews to move back into Jerusalem, and the first thing they do is they build a wall to keep out non-Hebrews. And I can't remember the name of the book. It's too bad. And I'm not going to go look it up. You guys can I'm sure you guys can get by with me not spending 5 minutes looking through a book trying to find the name of it. I keep wanting to say Hezekiah, but that's not it. So let's see. Yeah, I think it's just more of a cultural like decadence thing. With compassionate females now having at least 50% of the political power, that's more of a problem than Christianity. I mean, obviously, Christianity in and of itself is not pro-Muslim. I mean, the Crusades were not pro-Muslim. The Reconquista in Spain was not pro-Muslim. It's very Christian. It was like Christian nationalism. So, I mean, it's not so much the religion itself. It's just like, what kind of society is that religion superficially settled upon? Because, I mean, most Christians, their ideas are not particularly Christian. It's just like Western civilization, in this case, like decadent, feminized, liberalized Western civilization with some Christian flavoring added. And, I mean, some people are devout Christians, but most are not. And I don't think that it was really Christianity that caused Angela Merkel to invite millions of non-European immigrants into Europe. It was just sort of this feminine compassion stuff going on, which can be suicidal for a society. And I'm just going to move on to this question. This is from Siddhartha Lohachita. And Siddhartha Lohachita says, modern Thailand and its anything goes attitude. So that's like the title of his question. The heading of the question is modern Thailand and its anything goes attitude. Then he says, where once there was only prostitution, sex tourism, now there are thousands of marijuana shops everywhere and alcohol. Is Buddhist ethics about letting things be, or should that be regulated or prohibited? Well, in a way, it's kind of going back to the previous question. I mean, it's like Christianity doesn't really cause mass like immigration of like migrants that in many cases are hostile to traditional Western values and so forth. And it's not Buddhism so much that is opening marijuana shops in Thailand. First of all, it's just a global thing. Recently, over the past, 20 years or so, just people have begun realizing that marijuana really is no worse than alcohol. In my opinion, anyway. Cannabis is not worse than alcohol. So why shouldn't it be legalized in a free society? It's not really that horrible. And from the Buddhist point of view, alcohol is worse than cannabis. Cannabis is allowable for monks to use medicinally. In the texts, alcohol is not. So yeah, definitely the rampant prostitution would be worse than marijuana shops in Thailand. And the Thais are just very sensual kind of people. Like Burma and Thailand are traditional arch enemies, sort of like Sparta and Athens, or like England and France. Over the course of centuries, they were just like favorite enemies of each other. And the Burmese are more stoic. There's much less prostitution. I've heard that just about any village in Thailand will have like the village prostitute, that kind of thing. You don't see that in Burma, or at least not when I was living there. Alcohol in Burma, like in the movies, the standard tearjerker, like melodrama movie where, boy meets girl, boy loses girl boo-hoos for a couple weeks and then marries the rich guy that her daddy sets her up with, whereas the guy just drinks himself to death with Johnny Walker Red Label. So, I mean, there is sort of socially mainstreamed consumption of alcohol in Burma. It's mostly the rich, and also you'll have like the village drunk. Like what's his name? Otis on the Andy Griffith show. He's just the town drunk. And you have that sort of thing. And it's drinking alcohol kind of has the same stigma to it as sort of like taking narcotics in the West. It's gradually becoming more acceptable. You don't want to shame anybody for being a junkie, anything like that. For being like a fentanyl-addled zombie on a street corner in Philadelphia. You don't want to actually blame anyone for that. And the sun is coming out. Just a second. Gotta close this. All right. That's a little better. I still got stripes on my face. Just a second. Not even funny. All right. That's about as good as we're going to get. So let's see here. I got to get back to the question. Is Buddhist ethics about letting things be, or should that be regulated or prohibited? Well, to some degree, it is regulated or prohibited in Burma because they're just more conservative. Whereas Thailand is more liberal, sort of like France was traditionally more liberal than England, or Athens was definitely more liberal than Sparta, of the two arch enemies. Thailand is just a more sensual kind of society, and apparently it has been for centuries. So Buddhist ethics, you gotta like choose your hills to die on, I guess. The government just has to decide what priorities they're gonna have. And in the Burmese military government, their top priority is like they gotta stomp out political dissent. Opposition to their power. That's their main priority. And you can do other things and they don't really care all that much. So, like I was saying early on, this like the Burmese village is mainly governed by tradition. It's almost anarchistic. It's just people follow tradition and they follow Buddhist tradition. And so things like drinking alcohol or killing animals, it's just sort of like a politically incorrect in a Burmese village society. Like one of my main supporters, her family was publicly shamed because her brother married the daughter of a fisherman. And I mean, in the West, a fisherman, there's no stigma at all. Fishermen tend to be relatively rich, especially if you're in Alaska catching halibut or salmon or something. You're making big money. But I mean, Jesus helped people catch fish. So in Christian society, catching fish is fine. But in Buddhism, like to be a butcher, that's low status. Or to be a fisherman, low status, because I mean, you're just doing like a non-dharmic livelihood. It's wrong livelihood. And it's just, there's like a social stigma to that, at least out in the conservative village countryside. And I'm not really sure, I'm not nearly as familiar with like village society in Thailand. Although, like I said, I've heard that even like remote villages will have at least one prostitute. But I haven't even answered the questions yet. The question, is Buddhist ethics about letting things be, or should that be regulated or prohibited? Buddhist ethics is generally negative. Like you read Buddhist ethics, it's not positive. It's not you should do this. It's you should not do this. So just to do absolutely nothing is not immoral at all. I mean, you can just sit there and watch somebody get murdered or whatever, and that is not immoral from a Buddhist point of view, depending on your mental states, depending on your volitions. But just inaction is morally neutral from a Buddhist point of view. So, I mean, you shouldn't like take intoxicants, and you shouldn't promote the taking of intoxicants. You shouldn't encourage people to get drunk, for example, or to, break any of the 5 precepts. You shouldn't do it yourself, and you shouldn't encourage others to do it. But aside from that, it's you're doing good. So Buddhist ethics is, I mean, it's subjective. Buddhist ethics is with regard to yourself. You want to keep yourself pure. You want to purify your own mind. That's what Buddhist ethics is all about. But you shouldn't be promoting immorality to others, because in a way that's affecting your mind. That's corrupting you by promoting corruption in others. But so long as you're just like patiently enduring the corruption all around you, then you're not doing anything wrong from an orthodox Theravada Buddhist point of view. I think I mentioned before that in the times of the kings in Burma, before the British took over, that there was a kind of minister in charge of maintaining Sangha discipline. Sort of like the monk police, where if a monk was caught, drunk in public or something, he'd be thrown into a kind of Sangha prison, that kind of thing. And I guess in Thailand, they will actually defrock monks that are found drunk in public, even though technically you can't do that. And the only person who can defrock a monk is that monk himself. You can't just force somebody to stop being a monk, which is one reason why in the past, if the Burmese government is going to defrock a monk, they don't just say, okay, you're not a monk anymore, because they really do not have the authority to do that. I guess the Burmese government understands this better than the Thai government does. So what they would do is they would have the monk essentially assaulted by a prostitute, because that would be parajika. If you are having sex and you enjoy it for even one split second, that's it, you're excommunicated. So that's how they would do it. They just bring in some voluptuous, immoral female with the monk, who is probably sexually frustrated anyway from being celibate for so long, and she would have her way with him, and then he would just stop being a monk. But I'm just sort of wandering all over the place, I guess. But all in all, I do not consider legalization of marijuana to be necessarily a bad thing. I do not consider it to be any worse than alcohol anyhow. And America tried outlawing alcohol, and it didn't really do very well. And so they had to repeal that amendment of the Constitution. And I'm just moving on to the next question, which is also from Siddhartha Lohachita. Do you think it's immoral to make a profit, even a small one, from teaching Buddhist philosophy or through donations like buy me a coffee in a website. Well, morality is, like I was just saying, it is subjective. It depends on your mental states rather than your outward physical actions. So two people can make money from teaching Dhamma. One of them is doing something wrong and the other one isn't necessarily. So, I mean, if you're motivated by greed, then yeah, definitely you're doing something that would be akusala or unwholesome in Burmese or Buddhist ethics. And I mean, it is true that Dhamma should be free. Like, I really do not like the idea. I mean, I have my own books of philosophical reflections for sale on Amazon, but I've steadfastly resisted any urge to monetize, like my translation of the Attaining, for example. It was always my idea that that should just be for free distribution. That is like my gift to the world, so to speak. I was just performing a public service by making that translation, at least with regard to sharing it. I mean, the main purpose of my making the Attaining translation is I just, at the time, was unaware of any good translations, so I had to make my own. Since then, there have been better translations coming out. At least better than the ones I was exposed to. Not necessarily better than mine, because I'm kind of biased in favor of my own translation of the Attaining. Do I think it's immoral to make a profit, even a small one, from teaching Buddhist philosophy? Again, yeah, it depends on the motives of the person who is making the profit. But, I mean, I would discourage it. I mean, I'm not really in favor of making a profit. Like, definitely, I do not have any of my YouTube videos monetized. But the main reason for that is I really do believe in the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I have loathed commercials from the time I was a kid. So I don't want to subject other people to commercials, which I personally despise. But making a profit, I mean, what happens if somebody just freely donates and then you make a profit through not really trying? It's just that some generous person values what you have done enough that they have sent you money. And that's happened to me several times, quite a few times. It has happened. So, I mean, that's not necessarily immoral. I made no effort to get this donation, really, other than just answering questions and so forth. Yeah, so, I mean, really, it does depend on the mental states of the person who is making the profit. I mean, are they doing it for the purpose of making a profit? I mean, are you teaching Dhamma because you want to get famous or rich or whatever? Then yeah, I mean, that would definitely not be wholesome activity. But if you're just teaching Dhamma as a way of, performing a public service, or you just enjoy teaching Dhamma, and then somebody donates to you without you even asking for it, then that would be sort of the other end of the spectrum. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But of course, then you got this intermediate zone of, like saying where the people could donate if they want to. And I mean, that's like in the links below this video, probably. There's like a PayPal address or something down there, I'm sure. So, yeah, I mean, life in general is immoral. If you really get down to it, from the Buddhist point of view, then, I mean, even putting salt and pepper on your food to make it taste better is like wallowing in sensuality. Listening to music is wallowing in sensuality. Having sex with your own wife, wallowing in sensuality. So, I mean, from the Buddhist point of view, I mean, it's not like Christianity where it's just white or black. There's all this stuff that's good and all this stuff that's bad and not much in between. Whereas in Buddhism, almost everything is in the gray zone. It's not whether it's immoral, it's just how immoral is it. I mean, if it's just sort of like trace amounts of immorality, then as a general rule, it's still pretty much okay to do that, because completely avoiding immorality, I mean, you'd have to be a saint living under a tree in a forest. So I guess I better just move on to the next question. This is from RFS. And RFS says, if a monk commits a serious offense, are they able to reordain under any circumstances? Well, the serious offense in question would be parajika. If you commit any of the 4 parajika offenses, like one is having sex, even with an animal. One is, let's see, stealing anything valuable enough that you could be arrested for it. Let's see, the next is murder, and then the next, it's an ascending order of severity, or ascending order of just the heinousness of the crime. So SECKS, it's the lightest excommunication, then stealing, then murder, which would include like encouraging a woman to get an abortion, encouraging somebody to self-delete, anything like that. Using black magic, hiring a hitman, anything like that. And then 4th, the most serious, the most heinous of the 4 parajika offenses is knowingly lying about having attained superhuman mental states. Like you claim that you're enlightened when you know you're not enlightened just because you want to get famous or you want to get rich or whatever. Yeah, that's even worse than murder from the point of view of Theravada Buddhist monastic discipline. So any monk who commits any of these 4 parajikas, that's it. I mean, you cannot be reordained as a monk for the rest of your life, but you can be reordained as a novice, a samanera. And I read about that in a book by a previous Thai Sangha Raja who wrote the entrance to the Vinaya Mukha. He said that he saw some old novices and he asked about them and why aren't they ordained as monks since they committed a parajika offense. So that's the highest they can go. They can be reordained as a novice, a 10 precept novice, 10 precepts plus the Sekya rules, but you cannot be ordained as a fully ordained bhikkhu for the rest of your life. And then any offenses less than parajika, you're not even kicked out of the monkhood. So you can be reordained. If you commit Sangha Disesa offenses and then you drop out and then you want to reordain, you still have to do the penance for the Sangha Disesas you did, or the Sangha Disesa offenses that you committed before you dropped out. So there's that too. And I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Gordon. And Gordon says, what is the Buddhist take on torrenting copywritten media or software? And I'm not exactly sure what torrenting means. I've had it explained to me before. It's sort of like you're not breaking the rule technically because you're downloading like a movie, for example, in kind of a scrambled state, not in the state in which it was copyrighted, but in a scrambled kind of a state or a partial state, which is then reassembled in your computer, something like that. But what is the Buddhist take on I mean, obviously, there's no rule against torrenting copywritten media on software because that stuff just did not exist when they were coming up with the rules of monastic discipline. But technically, it could theoretically, potentially fit under stealing, like copyright theft. So, I mean, if it's illegal, I mean, it depends on the law. In this case, it depends on the law of the land. Like if you're in Burma and they just don't have copyright laws, then you're fine. But if you're doing it in a country like maybe the USA where they do have copyright laws and there is such a thing as copyright theft, then, I mean, if it's a severe enough theft that you could be arrested for it, then yeah, I mean, that would be theft. And if you're a monk who did that, then you could be excommunicated for the rest of your life. If that's what you did, then you're automatically excommunicated, whether or not anyone even finds out about it. So monks especially have to be really careful about that sort of thing. But, in this particular case, with regard to theft, I mean, to take what is not given, I mean, if you have doubts, if you think maybe it's immoral, then you shouldn't do it. But, I mean, if it's illegal, then, I mean, technically, you would be legally a thief by doing it. But again, Buddhist ethics are psychological and subjective. Stop it! Buddhist ethics are psychological and subjective. And so, I mean, if you feel like you're doing something wrong when you're doing it, then yeah, that's a good indication that you really are doing something wrong. That, I mean, even if it's just the feeling, I mean, you could be doing something completely innocuous and you feel like you're doing something wrong, then, I mean, you really shouldn't do it because, I mean, in a way you are doing something wrong by doing something that you feel is wrong, even if outwardly it's completely harmless. So you got to watch your own mental states and know thyself. And also, I mean, if you want to be a stickler on technicalities, you should find out whether it really is illegal or not. Just because something's illegal doesn't mean that it's immoral. I mean, driving 60 in a 55 mile an hour zone is not really immoral. Might be illegal, but it's not really immoral. But you do have to take the law into consideration with regard to certain things, especially for a monk. You know, like stealing, you know, it depends on like the value of what you're stealing and like whether or not you could be arrested for it, that kind of thing. So let's see. I guess I'll just move on to Gordon's next question, which is as follows. Islam and Christianity more or less accept anybody the instant they express a desire to convert, whereas Judaism is rather notorious for denying potential converts or putting roadblocks in their way to test their sincerity. Where does Buddhism fall on the ease of accepting converts? Well, before I get to the actual question, even some Christianity is a little bit particular about who they're willing to accept. For example, I remember reading or hearing long ago that Michael Jackson wanted to become a Jehovah's Witness and they wouldn't take him. And Judaism, it's kind of an ethnic thing. I mean, you do have non-Hebrew Jewish people like, well, Ivanka Trump, for example, or Sammy Davis Jr. I think he became Jewish. Elizabeth Taylor, you know, because she married some rich Jewish guy, so she converted. So it does happen. It's just not really super. I mean, there's an ethnic element to Judaism. You know, they're God's chosen people because they were this tribe, not because they just chose to follow so much as, you know, it's like this ethnic tribe that was, or 12 tribes, I guess, that God favored for whatever reasons. But with regard to Buddhism, yeah, it's really easy. I mean, where does Buddhism fall in the ease of accepting converts? I mean, all you have to do is just take 5 precepts and the 3 refuges and 5 precepts, and you're a Buddhist. I mean, you could be like a really heretical one if you also accept other beliefs that really are not Buddhist. But, I mean, from the Buddhist point of view, I mean, all you have to do is just sincerely want to be a Buddhist and take the 3 refuges and the 5 precepts, and boom, you're a Buddhist, regardless of all else. And even with regard to being ordained, I mean, the Burmese especially are notorious for ordaining people that aren't even Buddhists. Like, I met an Austrian Catholic priest once wearing monk's robes, and he didn't like stop being a Catholic. He was still an ordained Catholic priest, but he's wearing monk's robes. And it's like, I warned him. It's like, really, you shouldn't be doing that. But I mean, they will ordain anybody. People that just shouldn't be ordained. Like, I remember one time when I was a very junior monk, this old Burmese guy was ordained, and these temporary monks, I mean, he was just a temporary monk. The Burmese, it's called Dulaba ordination, Donlaba ordination, which means hard to obtain, hard to get, because it's such a rare treasure to be able to be ordained as a bhikkhu. You know, it's harder to be like a monk, an ordained monk, than to just be born as a human. Most humans, they don't have the opportunity to do that. So in a way, it's considered to be this great blessing from the Buddhist point of view, to ordain somebody, even just for like 3 days, to be a monk for 3 days. It's like this great blessing. And so they ordained this old guy who just didn't know any rules of monastic discipline. He's like dancing around with like his granddaughters and stuff. You know, they come to visit him and support him and everything, and just acting like he's not a monk at all. You know, he didn't get it. He was relatively very old, and so, you know, he might have been kind of, his faculties may have been in decline also. But I heard another story about, there was this friend of mine, an American monk, who was staying at some big school monastery, which is kind of on the outskirts of a big city. And he heard this weird uproar going on, and he goes outside to see what it is, and he sees there's this monk just wallowing around in this pond, yelling at the top of his lungs. And he asked about it later, and it turned out that this was another one of these temporary monks who was an alcoholic, and he was going through the delirium tremens as a monk. You know, it may be that he was ordained temporarily as a monk just to help him go cold turkey on booze or whatever. And so, I mean, some Burmese monasteries will just ordain damn near anybody. You don't even have to be a Buddhist, which is not good. Even at Pandita Rama, I spent 2 months doing intensive practice at Pandita Rama back in the late 90s in Rangoon. And there was this Mahayana Buddhist monk. He comes in wearing gray pajamas, and he didn't like that he was treated like a layperson. You know, he had to go behind all the monks at meal times and stuff. And so he just got himself ordained as a Theravada bhikkhu, even though he didn't stop being a Mahayana monk. Which, I mean, that is really not correct procedure. You know, if you're a Mahayana monk, you want to be ordained as a Theravada bhikkhu. You have to stop being Mahayana monk before you can be ordained as a Theravada bhikkhu. You can't be both at the same time. But he was, because even in a relatively strict-ish monastery like Pandita Rama, when U Pandita was still alive, still they were doing this kind of stuff. So Buddhism is like the extreme easiest to enter. Even like if you're in Burma at some monasteries, even to be ordained, you don't even have to be a Buddhist. It's weird. But to be a Buddhist is a subjective thing. So, I mean, if you take refuge and keep 5 precepts and consider yourself to be a Buddhist, and you're a Buddhist regardless of the fact that you may have never met any other actual Buddhist in your life. So let's see here. I'm just going to go to Gordon's third question. And Gordon's third question is, what is your answer to the transgressive fourth question below? And the answer is yes. I answered the fourth question below with a yes. But I'm not going to read the fourth question because that would be transgressive. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. Oh, wait a minute. And I'm just thinking here. I think they might have retracted the question, because I remember seeing a certain question. This next question reminds me of another question that somebody else asked. Anyways, this question is from somebody named Tynan. I don't know how to pronounce this name. I've never known anybody named Tynan before. I think it's Tynan. And Tynan says, I am wondering what your thoughts are on the Buddhist precepts and whether they can be bent or broken in certain circumstances, as I can think of a few. For example, no killing. If we saw a child about to be murdered in the moment, should we break the precept and kill to save the child, or should we watch the child die to ensure we do not break the precept? A few other examples, but this will make this very long, so I'll leave the one example here. When I think of this myself, it brings me back to the story when Jesus was speaking with the Pharisees about saving the donkey on the Sabbath day. Okay, well, this is going back to that question of whether Buddhism makes you inhuman or not. See, whether rules can be bent or broken, like Buddhist precepts. I mean, technically, no. So, I mean, technically, the moral thing to do, if a child is about to be murdered, I mean, you can try to stop the murder from happening, but you can't really do that morally by killing the person who's about to kill the child. Which is one reason why you become a monk. You renounce society, which causes you largely, for the most part, to avoid these situations entirely. You're off alone in a forest somewhere where you're not even allowed to slap mosquitoes that are biting you. So, I mean, I've discussed this before, where, I mean, you have the right to choose whether or not you are willing to take the hit. So, I mean, I've broken rules, I've fudged on rules, sometimes with what I consider to be good reasons. Like, for example, it's against the rules for a monk to give medicine to lay people. I mean, if it's like one of your parents or like a monastery attendant, then it's allowable. But just like lay supporters in the village to be practicing medicine by like giving them medicines is against the rules. You're not supposed to do it. But then I was living in this place that was endemic with falciparum malaria, which is the worst kind. I would have died several times over if I didn't have good malaria medicine. And one of my main supporters told me that his daughter had malaria for this god-awful amount of time. You know, it was many, many days. It was many weeks even. And so after kind of questioning him about what her symptoms were, because Burmese villagers are not good at diagnosing illnesses, it did seem like she had falciparum malaria. She was having chills and fevers on alternate days, which I don't know any other, maybe brucellosis or something might have similar symptoms, but it was endemic with malaria in that area. So I gave him the pills. She got better. I committed an offense, but I may have saved somebody's life. And still, I mean, I still broke the rule. There's no loophole that says if you've got a good reason you can break the rule. No, you still break the rule. But I mean, still sometimes you can judge for yourself whether you are willing to take the hit. You're going to be committing some sort of unskillful karma, bad karma by doing something, but still it may be considered by you to be the lesser of two evils. Like somebody's going to kidnap a child. You see somebody like pulling a child towards a car, and it's obviously not the child's parent. The child is terrified. I mean, you could just body slam that guy. You'd still be making some sort of, you might be motivated by anger when you see this happening. Now, already bad karma, even if you don't do anything, because you're feeling anger. And then you just, tackle the guy to save the kid. The guy might scrape the side of his head on the sidewalk as his head hits the ground, that kind of thing. I mean, you are doing a certain amount of unskillful or bad karma, but I mean, you might not be able to live with yourself if you just stood there and watched them like abduct this child. So that's one reason why monks go off alone into a forest where they're not exposed to this sort of stuff. They're not put into these situations where the lesser of two evils is still evil or just bad karma, anger and violence and that sort of thing. So, yeah, you have to make your own choices. But I mean, there really are no loopholes. There are no exceptions to karma. If you are motivated by attraction, aversion, or delusion in your actions, you're committing an unwholesome act, regardless of what the act is. Like I already said, it's like putting salt and pepper on your mashed potatoes to make them taste better. You're wallowing in sensuality. You're acting in a greedy manner. So in Buddhism, I mean, it's not just black and white like it is in Abrahamic religions. It's for the most part just all shades of gray. And somebody asked a question that I think might have referred to Attaining here that I think they deleted, which is just as well. I think they were making fun of him. Anyways, next question. Joe Doe says, who is Kevin Maynard? And I have no idea. No idea whatsoever. Next question is from PSA. And PSA says, what do you think about the World Series between the Dodgers and the Blue Jays? It'll probably be over by the time you make your next video, but I was just wondering if you were watching it and what your thoughts were. No, I have not watched a baseball game in decades at this point. I mean, if the World Series is in fact over, as PSA implies here, I don't even know who won. I could not name a single like professional baseball player at all. Although I have been told that baseball is like the last refuge of the three main spectator sports in America, the three main ball games. You know, baseball, football, and basketball. It's the least contaminated by like political correctness or woke ideology. You know, football is just, it's awful. Basketball also, you know, it's just all this sort of leftist globalist propaganda stuff thrown into it. Male cheerleaders is like one of the most recent additions to like gay football, rainbow football. So yeah, I have no idea about, I have not watched a baseball game, have not given a shit about baseball games in many years. I was never really into baseball even before. I was into football before I became a monk, but that was about it. I was like basketball, just a bunch of tall black guys running back and forth in squeaky shoes in their underwear. It just really didn't do anything for me. I mean, watching sports in general, I've never really been super into sports. Pro football back in the old days, like when they'd play on real grass, sometimes in like rain and mud, that kind of thing, freezing temperatures, that kind of thing I kind of enjoyed, because pro football, American football, not soccer, but American football, at least when I was watching it, it was like a cross between war and chess. You know, there's like strategy involved in this kind of thing that made it more interesting. Basketball is just too fast, just, you know, 100 points a game, that kind of thing. Baseball is too slow. Golf is way too slow. I mean, sometimes Olympic sports, gymnastics, that kind of thing, fencing. I mean, they almost never show Olympic fencing, but that kind of thing I like. Don't watch TV much anymore, though, except for just like we've got like a $3 a month subscription to the Discovery Plus channel. So that's pretty much all we watch, is just stuff on Discovery Plus. No sports there. And so I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Rui. And Rui says, to what extent is recollection of death at the forefront of your mind in daily life? Recollection of death. I mean, the main recollection of death in my life lately is with regard to keeping fish tanks, because fish die sometimes, shrimp die sometimes, and so you're confronted by death on a regular basis. Just yesterday, we went to the local fish store, and my sweetie bought 2 coolie loaches to help kind of keep the baby snail population under control in her betta tank. And one of those loaches, when it hit the water, it pretty much just started freaking out. And then like within a matter of just a couple hours, it was dead, just due to some kind of toxin building up in the water. So it's just like that kind of recollection of death, just because you're confronted with it, you see death, you realize that, you know, like all beings are subject to death. Looking at the little dogs and thinking, oh, they're going to get old because dogs don't live as long as people do. You know, they're going to be all gimped up and stuff in a matter of several years. Just working in a potentially kind of dangerous environment at work, where sometimes you're moving toxic chemicals or just dealing with heavy machinery. So, I mean, you've always got to be kind of cautious, got to be always aware of your surroundings and so forth in order to avoid, you know, injury or death. So, I mean, that's always sort of in the background of my mind, not necessarily the forefront, but, you know, it's always kind of a consideration that death is a possibility if you're not careful. And then just animals, plants and animals, like especially little aquatic animals in fish tanks. Those are like the main recollection of death. I mean, I already mentioned a little earlier that my sweetheart and I would occasionally watch shows about, you know, like serial killers and so forth. So there's that. I mean, you see the news. There's lots of death in the news. So I mean, it's never really in the forefront, but it's always there in some form or another. It's the awareness of death is always there, especially as I get older. It's like when you get older. I mean, it's not like I'm afraid of death, but still, it's kind of there. So, to what extent is recollection of death at the forefront of my mind in daily life? Not very often, but it's always kind of in the background. It's always part of the surroundings, or at least a lot of the time it is. So, I'm just going to move on to the next question. This is from Omi. It's like capital O hyphen small m, large M, small m hyphen small I. I have no idea what that signifies or how to pronounce it or anything. And then Omi asks the strange question, in a long, strange comment. Towards the end of the long, strange comment, he just asks this question: do you use an air fryer for cooking? And no, I do not. I've never seen the point in frying air. What are you going to do with fried air? It's just silly. So I'm just moving on to the next question. This is from Mr. Pranav. And Mr. Pranav says, do you know of any miracle story of someone who improved their physical condition? For example, someone curing their bad vision. Science says bad vision like myopia can't be cured. Or someone got cured from their chronic illness miraculously. And it was relatively recently, just the previous Q&A, or maybe 2 or 3 Q&As ago, I've been talking about like Mary Baker Eddy, like the founder of Christian Science, and her book, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. I mean, that's what the book is about, is this kind of miraculous healing. And at the end of the book is, I think it's 100 pages or 70 pages. It's either 70 or 100 pages of a chapter called Fruition, which is just testimonies of people who have been cured of all sorts of things. And most of the stuff that they're cured of is stuff that has a psychosomatic element, like tuberculosis. Tuberculosis has a psychosomatic element to it. Also, asthma. I've read that most cases of asthma are psychosomatic, and then also reading problems and digestive problems are like the main things. But some of these testimonies, one person had a broken arm, and they just used Christian Science to heal their arm just immediately. Another person had like this 40-pound tumor. That was like the very first testimony, because it was very dramatic. 40-pound tumor. She just read Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, just was convinced by it, that this is true, that I can't possibly have this tumor, and it just faded out. I mean, it didn't disappear, just poof, immediately like that, but it just went into remission immediately and just disappeared like over a period of just a matter of days. Also, within the realm of Theravada Buddhism, I've told this story recently of Uba Khin, who was the teacher of S.N. Goenka, who apparently had some sort of skin cancer on his face, that he started doing intensive meditative practice and it just went into remission and disappeared. U Pandita of the Mahasi tradition, in his famous book, In This Very Life, mentioned the story of some guy who had really bad tuberculosis, where, I mean, he was at the coughing up blood stage, and he went for an intensive meditation retreat, possibly just to set himself right before death. Just he wanted to die as consciously as possible. And U Pandita candidly admits that, he was kind of worried about contagion and so forth. This person with tuberculosis who has like uncontrollable coughing spasms and so forth. But, he was put into like his own little meditation cabin and started getting into deep meditation, partly because of this samvega, this feeling of spiritual urgency, because he felt, impending doom. And it just cleared up. He just got better. And like I said, with regard to Christian Science, tuberculosis is more controlled by mental states than most illnesses, or at least it's most easily controlled by mental states. That, it's more likely that just having the right attitude can give you resistance to tuberculosis or help you to clear up cases of tuberculosis. My father used to be an x-ray technician. He said almost everybody, at least back when he was an x-ray technician, has scars of tuberculosis in their lungs where it starts to kind of get a foothold, but then it's your body just, resists, and, your immune system or whatever it is, your attitude just clears it up. Also, of course, some viruses are like more likely to get an outbreak if you're under like emotional stress or physical strain, that kind of thing. Various types of things, but still that Christian Science book, had broken arms and tumors and that kind of thing, in addition to the more likely to be psychosomatic stuff also. So let's see. I guess I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Dama River. And this was the last question up until right before I did this video. Somebody else asked 2 more questions. But this was going to be the last question. And we're getting close to the end here. And it's less than 2 hours, so we're doing pretty good. This is from Dama River. And Dama River says, a Mahayana Buddhist teacher was giving a Dhamma talk once and said that there is no suffering in all of samsara greater than a god when he's dying. Even the beings in hell don't suffer as much. The reason for this is because in his entire life, all he's ever known was pleasure and being praised and worshipped, and he thought he was eternal, and all of a sudden he sees himself dying, and with his psychic powers he can see where he will be reborn. I was not able to ask the source of this teaching, and I wonder if you knew the sutta, and if you don't know the sutta, could you please just share what is your opinion of it? Do you think it's true? Does it sound legitimate? Okay, well, I do not recall seeing this in like a Pali Sutta. It could be a Mahayana Sutra rather than a Pali Sutta. It could be in the Pali text somewhere, but the main thing that I recall about dying gods, I remember reading somewhere in the text, the Pali text, Theravada Buddhist texts, that when a god is finally reaching, a small g god is reaching the end of his lifespan, his illumination, he becomes less glowy and shiny. It's like the light that emanates from him dims, and then he knows, and all of his friends know, he's going to be passing away into another life. And so his friends will kind of come around and like make their goodbyes and console him, and then he poofs out of that realm and gets reborn somewhere else. But I do not recall anything about how the suffering is greater than somebody being tortured in hell. Yeah, I'm rather skeptical about. It could be some sort of Mahayana thing, but I don't think that the Pali texts, except for maybe some sutta that I don't recall at all, I don't think the Pali text would say that right before a deva passes away from a deva realm, that he is suffering more than the beings being hacked with axes by demons in hell. I'm skeptical of that, partly because a god is going to have more serenity and more wisdom, and so they're going to be able to deal with, all they're doing is just kind of fading out anyway. They're not getting some horrible illness or anything. They're just kind of fading out. And in all likelihood, they're going to wind up with a fairly good life in their next life anyway. It might be a human life, but still, it's not going to be a really bad human life. If you were a deva in your previous existence, you get reborn as a human, it's probably going to be a pretty good life. Not as good as living millions of years in some heaven realm, but still, it's going to be lots better than being hacked with axes by demons in some blazing hot underworld. So, yeah, I am skeptical of that. Different devas are going to have different attitudes, I suppose. There could be some deva who knows he's going to wind up in hell, He did something really good and really bad in his life as a human. So he gets the reward first and then he gets the punishment afterwards. Maybe. But still, I think the mind of a deva is going to be more serene, more clear, and have more wisdom than somebody in some hell realm who's just all fucked up. So I'm just going to move on to the next question. And this is the last questioner. And this is from Practice Meta. And Practice Meta says 5-MeO-DMT is an extremely potent, short-acting natural or synthetic psychedelic compound known for inducing profound mystical experiences, often described as ego dissolution or a sense of oneness, with some describing it as an experience of nirvana itself. As a former monk, how do you react to claims that 5-MeO-DMT induces an experience of nirvana? I'm not sure if 5-MeO-DMT is just the same as just DMT, like one of the active ingredients in ayahuasca, for example. I have taken ayahuasca and also yahe, which is just like the Colombian version of the Peruvian ayahuasca, just somewhat different ingredients. The yahe tastes worse than ayahuasca. So, I have, if ayahuasca is DMT, at least I've taken DMT without the 5-MeO. Anyways, the main question here is, as a former monk, how do you react to claims that DMT induces an experience of nirvana? I don't think it's an experience of nirvana. It could be like what could be called temporary liberation, like jhana in the text is sometimes called temporary liberation, because at least the defilements are kind of suspended. And that's what DMT would do. If it's real nirvana, then you have exhausted all greed, hate, and delusion. No more of that. You don't fall back out of nirvana again. One who has attained thus does not fall back. So it could be an approximation, like a temporary artificial approximation of nirvana, but it would not be genuine nirvana or nibbana. Nibbana is blowing out. And after you blow out, you don't blow back in again after the chemical has finished taking effect. That is just a kind of suppression of habitual delusion. But then as soon as the drug wears off, the habitual delusion comes back because the karma has not been exhausted, and it's still the delusion is still there. It's just kind of attenuated. So I'm just going to move on to Practice Meta's second question, which is the last question of this particular episode of Q&A. He says, since every experiencer of 5-MeO-DMT I've read about has not been a monk, nor a practitioner of meditation for 30 plus years, would you be willing to take 5-MeO-DMT to provide your unique perspective? And like I said, I've already taken some kind of DMT, whether it was 5-MeO-DMT or not, I don't know. But I have taken ayahuasca before, and I have shared my experiences with that. But would I be willing to take it now? Well, I'm getting a little old for that shit, for starters. Also, I've got a woman who probably would vehemently put her foot down and insist that I not take 5-MeO-DMT, especially if somebody sends it to me. We went through this, something similar to this before, where I had a supporter send me a certain substance called DMXE. It was so newly synthesized, it wasn't even illegal yet. It was somewhat along the same lines as ketamine. It belonged to the same kind of general molecular classification as ketamine. And I was willing to take it. It's like my woman, and I'll get to that. But so I strategized. And so I just informed my woman that I had already taken it 5 minutes before. You take it, then you tell her so that she can't insist that you don't take it. And then it was fairly intense. I was kind of lying there panting for a while, which had her kind of freaked out. And I mean, she was even more freaked out that I actually took this substance that somebody I'd never met in face to face, sends me through the mail. I mean, it's pretty crazy. But I mean, I trusted the person. They had made generous contributions before. They're obviously in good faith, unless they were just like super psyops, some kind of spy, it's really, really devious stuff going on, which I just didn't believe. So I took it, and it was very intense, and my woman was not pleased. And so this 5-MeO-DMT, it's and under certain circumstances I might be willing to try it, but if someone were just send it to me in the mail, then that would not work. That's that wouldn't happen. But I mean, in my younger days, I was much more experimental, willing to try new things. Not anything. Like, I never took opiate narcotics, anything stronger than Percodan. I wasn't willing to try heroin, anything like that. But, sort of exploring the unexplored regions of the subconscious mind, that sort of thing. My father was the same way. He mostly used like hypnosis for his experimentations. But so under certain circumstances, I might be willing to try DMT, like the 5-MeO- version of it, if I haven't already. But it's really not on my bucket list at all. And so I guess we're done. I guess I answered the questions. I remember somebody asked a question that may have applied to this Tynan person, but then when I was collating, like making the list of questions, I didn't see it. So maybe they took it back, because it was kind of a naughty question anyway. No offense to Tynan, of course, because who I've never met and do not know. So anyways, I guess we're done. And so, like I should always say at the beginning, and practically never do, if you have any questions you think I can answer, especially with regard to Dharma, like Theravada Buddhism, early Buddhism, even like pre-Theravada Buddhism, meditation, monasticism, Burma, that sort of thing. I know some stuff about biology, have a degree in biology. I'm interested in politics, so that's kind of fair game. Although, we should try to keep sort of a dharmic theme to these Q&A videos, because that's really what it's mainly intended for. And like and subscribe if you have not done so already. Be sure to look at the URL links below if you are so inclined, and be happy. And now I got to push this button here.